Hello everybody, welcome back. It's nice to see
Hello.
so many people again. So we're just going to start with a soothing rhythm breathing exercise that we've done before, just to kind of get us in the zone before we then recap last session and talk about the aims for today. So just getting into a comfortable upright posture, both feet flat on the floor in front of you. Just having your back upright but in its natural S shape. Maybe imagining that there's a string holding your head up to the ceiling, and you can just relax on the end of that string like a puppet. And if you're comfortable, closing your eyes, or if not, just let your gaze soften and focus somewhere in front of you. And maybe just imagining that you're greeting a loved one. Perhaps it's a person, perhaps it's an animal that's really pleased to see you. You're really pleased to see them. Just showing that on your face, maybe having a bit of a half smile, remembering that our facial expressions can feed into how we're feeling. So just start by bringing your attention to your breath. So you might notice your breath, the feeling of the air going in and out of your nostrils. Perhaps the cool air going in and the warm air going out. Or maybe you notice your breath with your chest rising and falling. Or even lower down, perhaps your abdomen going in and out. And see if you can notice your breath in the back of your body, your rib cage expanding and contracting. And if your mind gets distracted, as minds do, just noticing and really gently and kindly bringing it back to focus on your breath. And just getting into a rhythm that's comfortable for you. And just seeing if you can, just start to slow your breath down slightly. Perhaps lengthening your out breath and deepening your in breath. And if it helps, on your out breath, just saying in your mind the words, mind slowing down. And again on your out breath, body slowing down. Perhaps even introducing a pause at the top of your in-breath. Just a second and holding it, and then gently letting it out. And perhaps noticing your body just slowing down a little bit. Feeling a bit heavier, sinking back into your chair. Feeling your feet a little bit heavier on the floor. And then taking a deep breath in and a long breath out. And as we end the exercise in your own time, opening your eyes, bringing your attention back, and trying to take this feeling of being slowed down and calmer into the rest of the session. Okay. Do you need me to share my slides, Lee?
Yeah, if you would.
Okay.
So yeah, hello everybody. Just going over session 2, what we did last week. So the role of mindfulness in compassion mind training. It's about directing attention, learning that our attention, our tricky mind, charge all over the place if we're not careful. So learning that we can actually direct our attention. The idea of notice and return. So we're sat there, we're breathing in, we're breathing out. And then our tricky brain flies off somewhere. So as soon as we notice that's what's happening, we can, if we wish, just choose to bring our attention back and allow our attention to settle back onto our breathing. And also the idea that we're not our thoughts and our feelings. They're important, really important information about us in the world, important information about what's going on for us, but they are not us. And then the different types of emotion, we looked at the emotional regulation systems. We looked at the soothing system. We looked at the drive system. And we looked at the threat-based system and how it would be a good idea to have them all in balance, but often one of them will dominate. And if it's the threat-based system, it can lead us into negative loops. Then we spoke about the impact of COVID and how that can trigger the threat system in us. Well, it has triggered the threat system in us and what we might be able to do about that. And then we spoke about the 3 flows of compassion. Compassion from us to ourselves, compassion from us to other people, and then from the world, from other people to us. And that all of these are important. A lot of what we're doing here in this course is about developing our own ability to be compassionate to ourselves. And then the role of wisdom, strength, and commitment. We need all of these things. We're going to develop that idea a bit more today, I think. We need all of these things. If I'm walking along by a raging river, I see somebody drowning in the river, I may be moved to help them, to go and do something about them, their situation, about their suffering in the river. But if I can't swim, it's no point me jumping in. I need the wisdom and the understanding also. So that was last week. Has anybody got any questions about last week? Did anything come up for anybody that they felt they needed to talk about or bring to the group today? We got the chat up on the side so we can maybe see if anybody does have anything.
I can't see it whilst I'm sharing.
Oh, can't you?
No.
What should we do about that? Should we take that off for a sec? Should we take it off for a sec just in case anybody does? Yeah. So if anybody does have any questions, just type them into the message and we'll answer them. So that the whole idea, this is session 3, so we're sort of getting halfway through. We're looking to bring in different strands, and then we go over and over a few things and hopefully develop the ideas too. I'm gonna have a sip of water because my voice is a bit sore today. Okay, I don't think anybody's got any questions. Don't know whether that's a good thing or not. Sorry, Esther.
We were obviously very clear, weren't we?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, yeah, I'm going to share again.
Yeah.
Okay, and next slide.
So right, so this week we're looking at the attributes of compassion, the barriers, what gets in the way of being compassionate, understanding our self-critic, so remembering that the most important relationship that we have is the relationship with ourselves. And also we're going to look at how we can develop our compassionate self.
Okay. So moving on to the next slide, I'm going to talk a bit about compassionate attributes. So based on years of research, would you mind going on mute, Lee? I think there's an echo. I can hear myself. Sorry.
Yeah.
Thank you. So yes, these based on sort of decades of research, have pulled together the various attributes of compassion, things that we can teach ourselves and pay attention to in order to be compassionate. And these are split. So we've got the first psychology of compassion, which is here. And then in a future session, we'll talk about the second psychology of compassion, which is often the individual skills that we might need to pay attention to. But this is a general, the kind of qualities that we need in order to be compassionate. So first of all, we need care for well-being. We need to actually care, wish ourselves well, wish others well, and actually kind of mean that. Then we need sensitivity to distress. So remembering that the definition of compassion is about noticing distress and then having a commitment to alleviate or prevent it. So sensitivity to distress, how do we create conditions where we do actually notice if we're struggling or if others around us are struggling? It's something when talking with workplaces about compassion, we need to pay attention to. How do we create an environment where we can pay attention to each other's distress? And then sympathy is another core quality, and often in healthcare we're almost discouraged from having sympathy. It can get confused with having pity for somebody, but in this context, sympathy is referring to actually being moved by distress, because it kind of linked with empathy below. Empathy is about kind of understanding the other person's perspective or understanding our perspective and being able to identify with the reasoning. But you know, somebody that's labelled as a psychopath may have very good empathy and understand that if I hurt your mother, that's probably the best way to hurt you. But sympathy is actually about being moved by that connection and that empathy, and that then driving this care for well-being. So really important part of compassion. And then non-judgment, obviously, that's something we've talked about in the cycle of mindfulness, that it's about not judging experience and just being able to be accepting of it, but also, yeah, not judging ourselves and just accepting kind of what comes up. And then finally, distress tolerance. So we need to be able to tolerate our distress or that of others enough to be able to take wise action, and not just action that's aimed at sort of alleviating our distress about somebody else's distress. So being able to kind of cope with that and not avoid and not sort of dissociate from it is massively important as well. Would you add anything to that? I guess, but sorry, just before, just thinking about non-judgment, one thing we haven't talked about is how human beings, we're set up to be very tribal, aren't we? And we find it much more easy to be compassionate with people that think and act the same as us. So, or with our kind of friends and family. And so a real challenge to non-judgment might be when people are very different from us. And sometimes we get pulled into, as human beings, having this judgment that whether or not people are deserving of compassion, and perhaps thinking that certain people aren't. And that's when our judgment starts to come in, because what we're really aiming for is being able to offer compassion to every human being. We don't always have to like them, we don't have to feel lovely and warm towards them, but we've still got that certain amount of respect and care for well-being within that. So would you add anything to that, Lee? Bearing in mind you're still on mute.
No, nothing to add.
Short and sweet. Do you want me to move on to the next slide about the barriers?
Okay.
Okay. Well, this isn't very smooth, is it? Oh, and one thing I've forgotten to talk about is that all of these ideas are infused with a level of warmth, because that's what helps translate it into actually having kind of emotional meaning and helping us make the emotional connection within that. So approaching situations with a level of warmth infused throughout all of these things. Okay. Do you want the whole of the slide?
Yeah, you may as well. So yeah, this looks like the old one, you know. I'm just looking at this rather than the one that I sent you. That's strange. Anyway,
do we need to change this one?
I just noticed to begin with, I think this is the one that you first sent me rather than the one that I changed.
Yes, schoolgirl error. Let me find it. I'm sorry about that.
It's not very different.
Yeah. These things are sent to try us. Right. Let me have a quick look.
I think I called it edit when I sent it back to you.
Yeah. Okay. So, aha. Yes, I have it. Let me, sorry about this. Right, and share screen. Oop. Working out what's the right one now, isn't it? There we go.
There you
go. Sorry.
Yeah, so fears, blocks and resistances. So what might stop us? What might lead us to not want to be compassionate to ourselves or to anybody else? Well, the first one is the idea that it's a weakness in some way, that it's self-indulgent, selfish, you know, pink and fluffy. It's to do with kindness. It can make us vulnerable. People might take advantage of us. I work in a prison. A lot of guys there struggle with this because their anger as an emotion makes them very powerful. They feel powerful when they're angry. And when I first introduced the idea of compassion to them, a lot of them might feel that compassion is something that will make them vulnerable. But we remember that compassion is it's a motivation, and it's about gaining enough strength and resilience to turn towards our pain. So that's where the courage comes in. Remember that, it's about courage. So another idea perhaps is letting ourselves or others off the hook. Do you deserve to be compassionate? We touched on this in the attributes. Do you deserve compassion from the world or from other people? Do other people deserve compassion from you? Do you deserve to be compassionate to yourself? Do you have to earn it? If anybody's got any questions, don't forget, you can always type stuff in as we go along. So the idea of compassion as something alien, something other. Is it something we've experienced before? Do we recognize this? Are we familiar with this in some way? Perhaps we need to practice it. Perhaps we need to become familiar with it, and maybe taking small steps. So this training is about just building up small steps all along the way, looking at an idea and then moving towards it slowly. We need to practice compassion. It's a very physical thing. One way of doing it, for instance, is through random acts of kindness. You can decide that every day you're going to do one random act of kindness, unbidden, something where you go out of your way to do something compassionate and caring for someone else. So we begin to familiarize ourselves with compassion. It becomes familiar, it becomes a friend. Also, that there can be, we can have painful memories, because compassion, when we turn towards our pain, that can touch our sadness or our anger or our loss or whatever our particular pain is. So we build up the wisdom to understand we need to be sensitive to this and turn towards it. And then when we do turn towards it, we are challenged sometimes by the power of some of the painful things that we are choosing to face. Yeah. Esther, anything that I've missed there that you'd like to say about fears, blocks and resistances?
I think just that what can be really helpful for ourselves and for others is to remember that compassion isn't a feeling. It isn't having a lovely warm feeling towards yourself or others. It's a motivation. So actually sometimes I know when doing kind of clinical therapy work in supervision, people kind of saying, oh, I don't feel very compassionate towards them, I'm struggling with this person. But I think the very act that the therapist is bringing the person to supervision to discuss means that they have got a real motivation there to be able to act in a compassionate way, even though they don't have particular feelings of warmth towards them. So I guess not getting too hung up on that and not worrying about that. And sometimes it's not completely appropriate to have these lovely feelings of warmth and sort of kindness towards somebody, even, but you can still have a motivation to kind of wish them well and do the best for them at the same time. So that can really help.
Yeah.
Okay, shall I move slides?
Yeah.
There we go.
So within this, we're talking about the idea of being self-critical. Again, stressing the idea that our most important relationship is the relationship we have with ourselves. That's where it starts. We're with ourselves 24 hours a day. So if, let's say, a lot of you may have children. Imagine if you have a child, if you had a child, if you don't have children, or imagine you had to choose a school you were going to go to when you were a child. Which school would you choose to go to? Would you go to the one where you were disciplined, punished if you got things wrong? That is the one on the left, by the way. Or Mary Poppins, who is there to maximize, to optimize, to bring out the best in somebody. Which one would you choose? I mean, is there a choice? Is there anybody that would choose I suppose there are people that would choose the discipline, the punishment. But the idea is that we carry around with ourselves all the time our own self-critic, often without realizing it. This often happens to people that are traumatized, abused in some way, have difficult attachment relationships when they're children. They end up somehow being their own self-critic. An instance of this, we were talking about this before. So I forced myself to watch the first two presentations just to have a look and see how it was coming across. And of course, before I realized it, I was focusing on all the negative things. The number of times that I said, the number of times, blah, 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 rather than looking at the whole picture. So it's a habit that we can easily get into. And particularly if we have a difficult childhood, if we're subject to trauma at any point in our lives, this can be what manifests. So which school would you rather go to? You have intuitive wisdom. Within you, there is that wisdom that we're looking to free up. And the critic somehow does that to the wisdom, puts it in a box and squeezes it in. We're looking to be creative and to be free and to allow ourselves to get in touch with that intuitive wisdom. Anything, Esther, you've got to add to that?
No, I don't think so. No, I'll move on to the next slide, shall I?
Okay. So here's a table of things. There's the shame-based self-criticism. There's the compassionate self. So the shame-based self-criticism, it's about condemning and punishing things we do wrong, how bad we are for doing it, rather than focusing on our desire to improve and how we can get better. So in that way, it's backward looking. Rather than emphasizing growth, it's about condemning, punishing. It can focus, the shame-based, the critic can focus on anger, frustration, contempt, disappointment, dragging us back all the time to the worst of ourselves, rather than opening out and trying to look forward to be the best of us that we can be. So again, focusing on deficits, things that are wrong, things that are missing. And within that can come a sense of shame about things that we've done, which tends to cut us off from other people. We in that way, we fear being exposed to people's gaze. And then a global sense of self. So rather than build on positives, Esther, global sense of self, have you got, I wasn't quite sure about this one.
This is about thinking that you're all bad, not just I'm somebody that made a mistake, I did a bad thing, but I'm absolutely all bad for doing that, and that kind of attacking of your whole self, rather than thinking, okay, no, I made a mistake, my behaviour was not particularly helpful, I'm going to change that. So compassionate self-correction would focus on the behaviour. It's not about letting yourself off the hook and not changing when you make mistakes, but it's seeing yourself as all bad.
Okay, thank you. And fear of failure. Rather than focusing on attributes, specific qualities of yourself, that's global. The sense of that I was talking about, that global sense of us being something negative. Mm. And sorry, go on.
Yeah, and I guess rather than, there's something about your kind of motivation. So often shame-based self-criticism is rooted in this fear of failure, whereas rather than thinking about how great I can be, it's about I've got to stay away from how bad I can be. So it's kind of a difference in motivation, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. And then the last one, the idea of withdrawal again. So rather than engaging, which helps us into the soothing system, that connection to other people that is soothing, that shame-based stuff tends to cut us off from other people. So it's like, the idea of tough love. And in focusing on the negatives, that stimulates our threat system. So it keeps us in our threat-based system. But there is a purpose to the critic. I mean, the critic is there particularly in the work that I do with people, a lot of it's around getting them to understand that actually that self-criticism is there for a reason. There is the functional analysis of self-criticism is tough love, trying to stop you making mistakes, trying to keep you on the straight and narrow. Problem is, it doesn't work. It doesn't work in the long run. It pushes you into that threat-based system again and again. I think that's about it really for this. Have I anything I've missed, Esther?
I think I was just reflecting on how you feel if somebody keeps reminding you of a mistake. If you've got something that you kind of regret and somebody keeps pointing it out to you and keeps reminding you, then eventually you kind of start to feel bad, and you probably wouldn't do that for somebody else, and you wouldn't feel very happy if somebody did it to you. Yet for some reason we allow ourselves to do it to ourselves a lot and keep going back to our mistakes. And and I guess we talked last time about your threat system, and our threat systems do make us do that, because the threat system's all about avoiding danger, and when something bad happens, it's designed to keep staying around in our brains and ruminating on it, but sometimes it can be pretty unhelpful. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing now, and just going to have a bit of a think about how a sort of functional analysis, understanding the reasons behind our self-critics. So an exercise I'm hoping you might be able to join me in is just to think about that. So I just want you to imagine a recent situation where your self-critic has jumped in and you've sort of really beat yourself up about something. Just take a minute or so just to think of that. Maybe it'll come to mind quite quickly. These things often do. And just if you can try and bring to mind some kind of image of your self-critic. So it might not be a really clear image, but a bit of a sense of them. Maybe they're bigger than you, maybe they're smaller. What are their kind of features? So if you can, it might not be a completely clear picture, but just have a think and maybe jot down, if you've got pen and paper there, what does it look like? Is it something sort of towering over you, pointing a finger like mine? Or is it something much smaller? What's the relationship there? And then if you can try and imagine your self-critic as another being talking to you, pointing out your mistakes. And just think about, how does it sound? What's its voice tone like? Maybe even what's its body language like whilst it's doing that? And what kind of things is it saying to you? And then can you get a sense about what your self-critic's greatest fear is? What's it so worried about? And what does it feel about you? How does it feel towards you? And as you imagine your self-critic there in front of you, saying these things, doing what it does, thinking about how it feels about you, how do you start to feel about yourself? So what are you thinking and feeling now about yourself? Okay, so hopefully people have got a little bit of a sense of their self-critic. What kind of observations, has anyone got any observations they wanted to write in their chat? I know for me, it sort of changes every time, but tends to be a kind of towering figure with a finger pointing, telling me how rubbish I am, that the greatest fear is that I'm going to make a mistake and people aren't going to like me. And so it's there to try and help me manage that. And it tends to sound quite aggressive, really, and condemning. And when I think about it too much and it's in action, I tend to feel quite small, really, in myself. Has anyone got anything that they want to share? Oh, thanks, Anna. Realise my self-critic's driven by fear. I've not thought about it like that before. It really helped me, enabled me to feel quite sorry for it. So perhaps the start of some compassion there as well towards it. Anyone else? Mine is whiny and small, but still makes me feel scared. Brilliant. How about you, Lee? Did you get a sense of yours?
Yeah, I have a very close relationship with my self-critic. I have done for many years. I think that was great from Anna, that thing about realizing it's driven by fear. It can be there's some more coming in here. Something bigger than me, staring, sniggering, and making comments.
Sniggering, yeah.
Resigned to my failure. Yeah, that's brilliant, guys. That's exactly it. It's really listening, because it's quite subtle, this. So what I've noticed is it is possible to change. For me, it's been possible to change my relationship to my self-critic, so it becomes lighter and less toxic. It can have less power over me. It'll always be there, because some of the work I do is about what would somebody fear if they didn't have. You're going to get onto this, Esther, in a minute, about what they might fear if they didn't have the self-critic. So how could you fear something that's making you feel scared? How could you, well, it's because it's there, it's trying to help you. Okay, excellent.
It's thinking about that kind of disappointment gap that we have as human beings between our desired selves and the selves that we often find ourselves with, but thinking, why does it have to be self-attacking rather than just disappointed with the situation? But it seems that self-attacking is often a go-to strategy. So it's big, soft, close to me, so subtle and hidden as kindness to make you better, but then also shuts you down. So yes, something about the impact of making you withdraw and shut yourself down.
I think that's really interesting there, Ros. It's because sometimes the critic is very clever, so it won't just come out as like a monster going. It will sort of like inveigle its way in and just like subtly undermine and subtly make you feel a bit odd. So great point there.
Yeah. So thinking overall as a sort of judgment, do you think, does your critic have your best interests at heart or not? So moving on then to, and I guess another thing that we can think about our critic, if we sort of analyse it a little bit more, is just thinking about where it comes from. Who does it sound like? Often we internalise the voices that we've had in our past, I know definitely at times if I hear myself criticising myself out loud, I think, wow, that's been a lifted phrase from my early life of one of my family members, and we all do it. As Vanessa saying, mine kind of directs me if I listen to it to prove itself right in its negativity. Yes, and it can be such a challenge not to listen to it, can't it? So rather than some types of therapy, I know schema therapy would think about asking people to eradicate their self-critic and shoot it even. But what the CFT approach would be to start to kind of develop our compassionate self that can maybe have some understanding and compassion towards our self-critic and see it as you know, not something that we push into one side, but something that we notice, validate, but then also try and develop this more compassionate self-correction instead. So moving on, I was hoping that we could now try and imagine our compassionate selves. So perhaps drawing on a time when we think we've behaved quite compassionately towards ourselves or maybe to other people. And just drawing on that experience. So the starting point for that is always to engage in our soothing rhythm breathing. So thinking about your posture, just like we did at the beginning, getting yourself into kind of a comfortable upright posture, both feet flat on the floor, imagining a string holding a head up to the ceiling, and just thinking about that soft, warm facial expression, maybe a kind of half smile, just letting the corners of the mouth lift slightly at the edges. And if you want to, closing your eyes, or if not, just focusing somewhere in front of you. And bringing your attention to your breath. Perhaps noticing it in your stomach, your abdomen going in and out, or the air going in and out of your nostrils. And trying to just slow your breath down slightly. Just resting on a pace that's right for you. Perhaps having a little pause between your in-breath and your out-breath. And if it helps, saying the words in your mind on the out-breath, mind slowing down. And again on your out-breath, body slowing down. Just bringing to mind those qualities we talked about last time of wisdom. So knowing that we're all just trying our best. We're living in bodies and have brains that we didn't choose. And sometimes they can be tricky. And that we all just find ourselves here. Much of the things that influence us are beyond our control. And then trying to get a sense of that strength to be able to tolerate and notice distress and do something about it. So thinking, maybe adjusting your body posture, thinking where you feel that in your body. And then getting a sense of the commitment that you have to being more compassionate and taking wise action. So perhaps noticing where you feel that in your body, perhaps your heart, your stomach. And then just imagining seeing your compassionate self, this image that you have just in front of you. Perhaps giving you some guidance on a recent situation. Really trying to connect with what's its greatest wishes for you. What does it want? What does it look like? What's its facial expressions? What's its size in relation to you? And thinking, what does it sound like? What's the voice tone? And what kind of things is it saying to you? And how does your compassionate self feel about you right now? And then as you listen to your compassionate self and look at it, what do you think and how do you feel? Maybe noticing how you feel in your body. And how are you feeling about yourself? And then when you're ready, in your own time, just opening your eyes, ending the exercise. So I don't know whether people got a little bit of a sense of their compassionate self, perhaps first in their own body and then kind of as an external being. What did people notice? I know for me there's a real difference in voice tone and the kind of things that my compassionate self might say, like wanting to, saying, come on, you can do it. And one mistake is only one mistake. You're trying your best. It's not your fault. You can do this. Some said warmth, understanding, encouragement. You on a confident day, a slow and soft voice, smiling, wise. It's okay to be in pain, yeah. So having this tolerance of distress. I know at times I've had a vision of my compassionate self as being kind of a bit of a knight in shining armour that's got that feeling of strength that comes in and kind of says, it's okay, you're going to be all right. It's really helpful. What about you, Lee?
Yeah, mine's a Tai Chi master.
Ah.
Yeah, soft but very strong, and unassuming but with presence.
And I guess you can play around with this imagery in your mind. Sometimes you might act and sort of become your compassionate self, or other times it might be that you have more of a compassionate other that's kind of speaking to you. So what have people learned from this exercise? Is there any comments? Overall, do we think how does the compassionate self vary in its greatest fear or wish for you compared to the self-critic? Which one would you prefer to have teaching your children or friends? Your cheerleader. Excellent. Somebody said my compassionate self is my cheerleader. Brilliant. You all need a cheerleader. Somebody's struggling to find a critical voice at times, which I hope is a healthy sign. Perhaps it could be denial. Yes. trying to catch it, isn't it? It's developing our mindfulness of it as well that can take some of the sting out of it when we have the mindfulness. So any other reflections? Self-critic wants me to be punished, compassionate self wants me to be loved. Yeah. And then we could take this further if we had the time, but starting to think about what does our compassionate self, how do they feel towards our critic? What might they want to say? You know, and often trying to, and if we're doing this in therapy, we might be trying to develop somebody's ability to kind of validate and say, it's okay, I can hear you, I know where you're coming from, but let's try and approach this in a different way and still get the same outcome. It's not about pushing the self-critic out of the window. Sometimes it can be quite hard to access compassionate self and takes extra strength and courage. It does, particularly on a tricky day. Yeah. And similar to the 2-chair technique, yes, definitely. And we can, in therapy, we can sort of separate these out into chairs, or maybe we do that even in our own practice and kind of think, right, I'm going to sit here now and sit over there being my kind of self-critic, and then trying to have a compassionate self that reflects on all of these sides of ourselves. And there's a comment about the compassionate self accepting the person you are, isn't trying to make you different, judging, it's wishing you were better, etc. Yeah, self-acceptance. That's a good point. So I think, are we going to move on to a ending on a kind of bringing it all together and having a compassion to self exercise, unless there's any more comments, or you wanted to make any comments, Lee?
No, I'm all right. I'll just bring it all together, really. Another comment coming in there. Being biased. Passionate voice being biased, not quite trusting it yet. Okay. Yeah, well, just listening, really. Noticing. So should we... Sorry, Esther.
It can feel strange at times, can't it? Particularly when it's a new way of approaching things, and sometimes we're sort of faking it till we're making it at times when we're trying to introduce this practice, especially when we've listened to our self-critic for so long.
Yeah, so I think that's it, really. So, I mean, what we've looked at today then has been an awareness of the difference between self-criticism and self-correction. You know, that critic versus the compassionate way. And it's that back to it's to do with having a positive relationship with ourselves, a compassionate one. It's like using ourselves as a secure base, as a safe haven, somewhere where we can go, where we feel okay, rather than in our threat system where our critic exists. But it's listening to that critic and understanding that that critic's there for a reason. Not trying to fight it or destroy it, because that will just push us further into our threat-based system. So remembering that it's old brain, new brain, remembering that we're taking small steps here, that we need to practice all this. People here are talking about, like, don't quite trust it yet, not sure about this. Well, yeah, that makes perfect sense to me. Why would you trust it? Listen and get to know it and take small steps. Notice and return is you know, notice the threat system, return to your breath, return to the compassion. And we talked about the idea of the courage to turn towards the suffering, and people are talking about that when they're typing their notes. The courage to turn towards the suffering, and the strength to tolerate the pain, and the wisdom to know what to do for the best. Anything I've missed there, Esther?
No, I think that sounds okay. Right. Yeah.
So today, that's what where are we? We've got 5 minutes left. So today we're adding bits and we're bringing bits in and we're going over bits, and we'll do the same for the last 2 sessions. We'd like to finish today with doing a kindness and compassion to self exercise. And then we'll finish like we always do. We'll finish with this, and then we'll open our eyes and say goodbye, basically. And then hopefully we'll see you all next week. Okay, so the other thing I want to say is to remember that if you, this is a sort of a taster, an introduction to compassionate mind and compassion focused therapy. There's so much on the web. This is all Paul Gilbert stuff. We've learned from Paul Gilbert and the people that have learned from him. If you put Paul Gilbert into YouTube, if you go online and look for compassionate mind, loads of good stuff out there. Look for the Compassionate Mind Foundation and Paul Gilbert. That's the good stuff, and everything comes from that, really.
And particularly if people have noticed things about self-confidence that's kind of come up here, there's a really good book, Mary Welford's Compassionate Mind Approach to Developing Self-Confidence, something along those lines. But if you Google Mary Welford Compassion, she's got a great book as well that really pays attention to this stuff.
Yeah, the Compassionate Mind Foundation is a website, and it has lots of links there, doesn't it, to stuff that it is connected to it. So go to that for a go-to place. So let's finish then with an exercise with practicing compassion. We start off as usual with the soothing rhythm breathing. So just settle into a nice comfortable position, feet on the ground, that suspension from the top of the head, the idea of a nice relaxed facial expression. Feeling in your body settling into the seat, that desire to be kind and caring, that desire to be compassionate. Just allow your attention to settle on the sensation of the air moving in and out of your body. Just be aware of what is around you. Be aware of your tricky brain. When you notice it flying away, that's fine. That's what a tricky brain does. Just notice it. And then if you wish, you can gently bring it back and allow your attention to settle back on your breathing and the sensation of the air moving in and out of your body. And then I'd invite you to repeat in your head what I say out loud. May I be well. May I be happy. May I be free from suffering. May I be well. May I be happy. May I be free from suffering. May I be well. May I be happy. May I be free from suffering. Take a nice deep breath in. Breathe out and open your eyes. And then take that feeling into the rest of your day. And see you all next week. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Lee.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye. Bye.
Bye.